chairs and vice chairs, co-chairs, ranking members, thank you for the promotion. I'm not a state representative. Would love to have that honor. I am Connecticut's Chief Cybersecurity Risk Officer, and I'm here to discuss Senate Bill 709. I do a lot of speaking around Connecticut and internationally on the question of cybersecurity, and I'm often asked, are we safe? And the answer is, of course not. We are not safe at all. We're very vulnerable, as are people in all states. I will try to just summarize my testimony and hope you may have some questions. I have three simple points. One is that we're completely dependent on the digital world. That makes our modern life potentially devastating to compromise. Secondly, we need to defend ourselves. And third, the states are critical players in this. Sometimes we think that the federal government may help out. The federal government is not there to help. Think of it like a hurricane or an ice storm. If it happened, we would not call Washington and say, can you clear the roads? Can you take care of it? Those are our first responders. The response for both for prevention and for recovery lies right here in Connecticut. Just a few days ago, Director of National Intelligence Dan Coates reminded us that Russia is planning malware in our electricity grid. China is positioned to execute cyber attacks on our critical infrastructure. The most vital parts of our national government, intelligence, the military, the White House itself, our banks, insurance companies. Right here in Connecticut, of interest to us is the plans for the Black Hawk helicopter, the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, and the Aegis anti-ship missile system have all been stolen by the Chinese. I'm just trying to make the point that we are vulnerable and we are compromised. We are probed all the time. As one Connecticut official pointed out recently, his company was probed 1 million distinct times in one 24-hour period. This is not, is it happening, will it happen? It's happening all the time, not just hourly. You can't take an hour off in your defense. You don't have that to spend. In the state of Connecticut, there are about 5 billion connection attempts to the state government machines in Connecticut every month. 2 billion of those are rejected because they don't meet protocol. So the state is under attack as well. Half of all businesses in Connecticut, one half of all, have never done a risk assessment of any kind, never mind for cybersecurity. Now, S-Bill 709 is very important. It raises the question, statewide, how do we counterattack? What do? We have in plan right now, we are the only state in the nation that I know of that examines how we're doing in our utilities. But how about the rest of the state? We have a strategy, we have an action plan, but we don't have a management structure. Should it be centralized or decentralized? Dotted line or straight line? The two circumstances I know that I've worked on personally in Washington, D.C., I was chief of staff to Senator Ribicoff, and we decided to take all the parts of energy that were throughout the federal government and create a Department of Energy. Everyone had an agency that had, a part of their agency had something to do with energy.
If you could just give us summation, sir, we would appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. It was centralized. A decentralized solution was the Director of National Intelligence, where I served for several years. Kept everything in place, but had a coordinator on top of it. I think that 709 is very valuable, and that it raises the question of what should our management capacity be, should it be centralized or decentralized, and what should its priorities be? And I'd be glad to take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, sir. I believe Senator Wang has a few questions. Go ahead, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. House, I think you are quite humble in regards to your level of expertise. And I'm not sure when we made you a state rep, we gave you a promotion. Could you clarify what your current title is within the Department of Administrative Services? And that was a designation and a title given by Governor Malloy.
Yes, sir. I am the Chief Cybersecurity Risk Officer for the state of Connecticut. I'd served 4 years as chairman of PURA, Public Utilities Regulatory Authority, and there we created both a strategy and an action plan, which is currently in place. And because that was interesting and got launched, the governor asked if I would leave PURA and create a strategy and action plan for the state of Connecticut in its entirety. It has 5 points: state government, municipal government, private business, law enforcement, and higher education. So that's my current job.
Thank you. And in fact, in reading through your study that you finished up at the bequest of Governor Malloy, I was able to kind of cull those priorities. But in addition to service in PURA and understanding our grid protection, but even before then, you had been at the highest level of intelligence service. Could you kind of elaborate a little bit as a set of a foundation for us to kind of really value the words that you're offering on this area?
Well, thank you, sir. Let's see, I had 3 or 4 different federal jobs, which involved top secret and other compartmentalized clearances, the existence of which are classified. I was on the National Security Council staff as a White House fellow under President Ford. I was chief of staff to Senator Ribicoff and also chief of staff to the Senate Majority Leader, Robert Byrd. And I participated in the strategic arms limitation negotiations with the Soviet Union. I was the chief of staff for that process in the Senate. Then subsequently, I joined the intelligence community under President Obama, and I was head of Congressional Relations and Communications for the Director of National Intelligence. And then I also spent some time working for one of the spy agencies called the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. It's the agency that takes the pictures. Those are a few other things, but those are the highlights, sir.
The highlight reinforces that we should heed the thoughts and comments you offer very importantly. And thank you for sharing your expertise. Now, you mentioned something that's very interesting. The federal government, very much like FEMA, does not have a centralized cybersecurity agency. That seems remarkable to me. Why is that? And I think you cited Senator Coates or the security officer for our federal government, Mr. Coates, Dan Coates, in some of his alarming words as well.
Yes, sir, Senator. Let's put it this way, that both the federal government and the states are coping with a new and very powerful threat. When they realize how powerful it is and that anyone can be compromised, literally anyone, they then decide, what are we going to do? Now, the locus of dealing with that challenge used to be at the National Security Agency. That's where we defend against cyber attacks and where we also have an offensive capability. That unit was set up, let's see, in 2010. I was there at the ceremony. We created that entity. But post 9/11, we have wanted to protect the homeland of the United States, so many of the responsibilities for protecting the United States were shifted over to the Department of Homeland Security. Now, there is a department within Homeland Security where somebody looks after these agencies. But in the last few years, the leadership really came from the White House. There were 2 senior officers. Under the current administration, both those offices have been done away with. So there is, who in the executive branch is in charge of this? And that's a question that can be debated. Moreover, within Congress, there has been no serious cybersecurity legislation passed by Congress to resolve the very question that you pose, and it's one that needs to be presented, needs to be resolved.
Why do you think that? It seems that the issue of cybersecurity and the incidences of encroachment as well as violations occur almost daily in the news. Why has it not been addressed on a federal level?
Addressed but not resolved, Senator, I would say. I know there was an article recently that pointed out that the Department of Homeland Security, the chair right now, is very concerned about excessive regulation and finds that some of the provisions that would centralize and would govern this might involve additional regulations. I can't answer that question. How we approach this, I think, gets to the core of what you're asking at. Do we have a Department of Cybersecurity which has responsibility over this in every agency? Or do we do the similar thing to the Director of National Intelligence, where there's somebody who has prime authority over cybersecurity in every agency? And I think as a federal solution, that would make sense, because cybersecurity affects every single agency of the United States government, every department. It would not make sense to run those functions centrally, but the quality control, the making sure they're well trained, that people can transfer from one agency to another, that there are means to get them necessary security clearance, to tap the outside private sector to do all that, that could be tremendously enhanced if we had a recognized locus of authority at the federal level Sir.
Thank you. And given the lack of action or coordinated effort in the federal level, what you have demonstrated by this report that you put through, but also the recognition nationally that what we did in Connecticut was truly innovative in evaluating our internal cybersecurity. Where do you see the state itself being able to take that leadership?
Thanks, sir. Well, first of all, I was in Europe recently, and one of the presenters was a cybersecurity forum referred to the Connecticut model. And I was pleased to hear that and went up afterwards and asked him what he meant. And he said, "You're the collaboration state." And indeed we are. And that gets back to that plan that we set up at Pura. We did not have a formal docket mandating what Connecticut's utilities should do in cybersecurity. Rather, we had technical meetings and we negotiated with the utilities themselves. They agreed. So we'd have annual meetings, review with 4 Connecticut officials. It would be private and classified, remain secret. They would use a standard of their own choosing. They all chose the Cybersecurity Capabilities Maturity Model. And the final report would be subject to veto by any utility. Now, it's worked. We've had 2 of them. We've had a lot of national attention for that. We've had 2 reports. They're online. They indicate where our strengths are and what's being done to improve our cybersecurity defense capabilities. Now, that is for the public utilities. Because of that, the State Department has certain countries that they want to help strengthen their cybersecurity capacity. And they have asked me to, where I've been doing work for the past 3 years in the Black Sea region with Ukraine and 3 other countries, in the Balkans with the Balkan countries and also with some Baltic countries. It's maybe 4 or 5 trips I've made with some other national experts to show that when you cooperate, you can put together both a strategy and an action plan. So that the Connecticut model, although it's not that well known in Connecticut, does have some federal and international recognition of a systemic, voluntary, collaborative process by which we can make progress in public utilities. The rest of the state is up for grabs, sir. We have not decided how to deal with those other 5 things, the 5 areas that are in our state strategy and action plan.
Well, that's a lot of work to be done. 709 represents a kind of a centralized perspective in this, but as we have seen in state government, our IT structure are so decentralized amongst various agencies and departments. Could there be a model where there are 2 different ways of going about it? A centralized option and maybe a decentralized option, a collaborative option that you just cited earlier?
Senator, I think we need one or the other urgently, and that's one of the great values of this proposed legislation. We need to do one or the other. Right now, cybersecurity is and how to deal with cybersecurity is a decision made by every individual commissioner. He or she decides whether to have a cybersecurity program or not, and what to do about it. So there are parts of state government which are in very good shape. There are parts of state government which are completely vulnerable and have almost no defense whatsoever. That's unacceptable in the year 2019 when the vulnerability is so high. I personally, my own personal preference would be to have it be a decentralized form. For example, if all this were in DESPP, one proposal, what do you do about the business community? And what role would DECD have? Because, as I mentioned, half of all businesses in Connecticut have never, ever done a risk assessment. And they know they're vulnerable. And the trade association, CBI, and others know they're vulnerable. Should you run that in a centralized fashion out of DESPP? It could be a bit awkward. And I don't know where it should be housed. I've heard OPM, I've heard the Department of Administrative Services, Governor's, wherever it is. I think it would be better to have a quality control, priority setting prod to enforce good behavior and best practices, because cybersecurity has to be practiced in every corner of every agency in Connecticut. My personal preference. I want to say that I don't think there is one solution or the other, and I salute you for raising this bill, because now we're having that debate because the bill is before you.
Well, I think there's much to be done about this, but what I was hoping to increase the awareness of is the sense of urgency. I think we should wake up fully alarmed that we are under attack every day in every possible way, either through the Homeland Security aspect, through our corporate espionage, even through this phone that we have. We are under attack. Would that statement be fair to
That's
say?
not, it's fair, it's completely accurate, Senator.
So I want to thank you, and I don't want to take up any more time, but I also want to take a moment to thank Governor Lamont's administration and his staff's understanding of the urgency of this, and I'm very anxious and look forward to working with you and the administration in ensuring that our state is protected on the cybersecurity front. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Senator.
Any other questions? Yes, Representative Vale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
With this new division within DESP, do you know how many people that would be required to be hired?
I don't. It is a proposal. Right now, DESPP has, I would say, three major functions that involve cyber. First of all, the intelligence function has been upgraded. There's a fusion center called, the acronym is CTIC. Every state has one. It has moved from terrorism, from gangs, drugs, and now also looks at cyber threats. Most of the activity is at the top secret level. I've been down there, I have that clearance, I've seen the work they do. It's a step forward. Now, to harvest that intelligence, to know what is going on in Connecticut, then needs to go to some enforcement agency. A few years ago, the state police stood up such an operation. It does criminal investigation, and they're starting to add officers to it. And I think that's also a step in the right direction. They need to work with the municipalities. Representative, let me use, just to draw an example for you. If a Connecticut citizen is at home or at business and sees someone trying to break into that home computer or that business in order to steal intellectual property or money, what do you call? Well, if somebody is at the back door of your house with a crowbar, you know who to call right away, and you will get a prompt response. But what do you do if somebody's trying to steal your identity, your intellectual property, or your money? Who do you call? And we're creating that capacity within the Connecticut State Police, and they're working with the municipalities in order to have some way of investigating, of responding to that crime.
And I understand that. I certainly recognize the problem. Also, I like the collaborative idea of, sharing that information with the different agencies. But, I mean, is this something that can be done with the manpower we have now, that this can be created?
I think it needs to be augmented. The third one is emergency management. I just, the three under the ESPP, we're focused on hurricanes, ice storms, and floods. We ought to be pretty good at it now. It's been going on ever since the earth cooled. And we will continue to have those threats. The new threat, the one that really worries people, is a cyber attack that would cut off the flow of natural gas coming out of Philadelphia going to New York. 50% of all electricity in New England right now is generated by natural gas. How would we respond to the loss of half of our electricity over a prolonged period of time? Now, those are the three functions within DESPP. Does it make sense to have somebody control the cyber intelligence, cyber investigations, and cyber management? Right now, there are command and control systems under the state police, under CTIC, and under emergency management. I think we could get it done well if we had a senior cyber officer who could reinforce that work, and had a dotted line relationship to support them in what they're doing.
But couldn't that be someone that already works within the department instead of creating a whole new agency? That's my concern. I'm always reticent to grow state government.
Of course you could. Yes, sir. Of course. The question is, put it this way, the cybersecurity challenge has grown faster than the qualified people who are working in the area. There is a shortage at all levels. It's just simply entry-level cybersecurity warriors. There are 4,000 jobs lacking in Connecticut right now. These are people to go to work for a company to help you fix your computer and stay safe. At the senior policy level, there aren't that many of us. I am not a cybersecurity expert, but I like to say, in the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. I mean, at least I've worked on this tangentially at the federal level, but I do not tout myself as a cybersecurity expert. The answer to your question is yes, it could be done with the right person, absolutely.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
Sir,
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, sir, for your testimony.
thank you
We
very much.
appreciate it.